Welcome to Say More, the Powerhouse podcast dedicated to elevating the voices and journeys of women striving for the C-suite and those who've already conquered it. Brace yourself for candid conversations, illuminating interviews, and unfiltered insights as we delve into the triumphs, hurdles, and invaluable lessons learned along the path to success. Join us on this empowering journey where inspiration meets empowerment and wisdom reigns supreme. Get ready to ignite your ambition, harness your potential, and thrive alongside your sisters on Say More. Thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Say More. I am so excited that you decided to join us today. We have a great speaker and conversationalist today because it really is about having those conversations, sharing with one another. Say More, again, born out of the idea of not only inspiring, but empowering other women across the United States. And certainly with the thought that it doesn't matter where you are in your journey, that we want to meet you where you are, and we want to share not only tips, but also be able to reflect on those things that you may be experiencing and you're wondering, man, is this happening to someone else too? Am I the only one? You're not the only one. And we want to make sure that you never feel like that. So with Say More, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to say more. We're going to start saying more today with Stephanie Santoso. I am so excited to have you here, Stephanie. I know that you have an amazing journey, and I am certain that the listeners will be super excited to learn more about the work that you're doing. I know it, but man, I want the world to know about it. So I guess just to kick us off, could you walk us through your journey leading up to your current role? And I won't spill the beans on that. I'll let you do that because you do it in such an exciting way.
Oh, thanks so much, Kimberly, for the opportunity to share a little bit more about my experience and with your listeners. And I'm also just really excited to get the opportunity to go into deeper conversation today, one-on-one with you. So I had a somewhat windy, not quite linear route to the work that I'm doing now, co-leading the nonprofit organization that I co-founded called MakerUSA. And MakerUSA really is really focused on supporting communities that are really engaged in inclusive maker-centered learning and providing access to equitable maker spaces. But my sort of education and professional journey really started out in undergrad. I studied business and media studies. Have always had an interest as well in technology, but that wasn't necessarily something I focused on. And coming out of undergrad, I actually worked in advertising and marketing in New York City for a few years. On the agency side. First few years was actually focused on working with Broadway shows and performing arts organizations, because theater is actually something that I really enjoy personally, not a performer at all, but I really enjoy it in terms of
I was going to ask.
Enthusiast, like as a spectator. And then eventually moved over to a larger agency called Ogilvy, where one of my main accounts was actually IBM. And I realized in working as an account manager on the IBM software account that I was really enjoying reading these, like, the IBM would send over these like very technical briefs about their software. And I realized I actually was really enjoying, that was like the driest part of the job for most of my team members. They were like, how are you enjoying this? And I was like, I don't know. I just really like understanding how the software works. And they're like, oh, okay, you can do that and then summarize it for the rest of us. And so I made a mental note that I was like, okay, well, if I ever went to grad school, or maybe like at some point I might enjoy a career that's related to technology in some way. And so I worked in the space for a few years, but found that it wasn't necessarily for me. It was very competitive. I found the industry to be very competitive, and I was someone that like really valued collaboration, and that existed in that space, but it felt very competitive at the time where I was very junior, and like to sort of like rise up the ranks for me, wasn't natural for me to kind of like compete, feel competitive and be competitive
Right.
in that, it's like sort of that corporate environment. And so I ended up moving back to Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh area where my parents lived at the time. And one of the things that actually in my family, there's a history of entrepreneurship. My mom was an entrepreneur. I'm second generation from a second generation immigrant family. So my parents are both from Indonesia, and my mom at a very young age was an entrepreneur in Jakarta, where she lived and grew up. And one thing that like my mom and I had always like talked about was like, wouldn't it be really wonderful to start our own business together? So in the sort of the span of time where I had moved back to Pittsburgh and was kind of figuring out what my next career move would be, my mom and I came up with this idea to launch an all natural baked goods company. I know this is like you don't know this.
I love this though. I mean, this is exactly what our listeners need to hear.
So this I actually think as one of the like really formative experiences. Like I think the experiences that I had as an entrepreneur, starting up this baked goods business with my mom. Actually, it's called Kupa Ladua Oven. We still have our website. It is like immortalized online because more as an homage to like the time that we were not selling our baked goods anymore, but like it's still there because my mom and I love the time we spent together starting up this business, and so I keep the website alive. But so we did it. We found at the time kitchen incubators were not as widely available. So these are, for folks who don't know, they're shared spaces basically to help aspiring food entrepreneurs be able to like really share the cost of an industrial kitchen. Because at the time, if you really wanted to sell your products to retail stores, a lot of them required you to be in a industrial kitchen. Like you couldn't use a home kitchen because it wasn't up to sort of the health and safety code standards and things like that. And so we found a kitchen incubator. We tested recipes with like friends and neighbors, and we launched we launched with, I can't remember at the time, I think it was like 2 or 3 flavors of our cookies, and yes, we sold them at like farmers markets and things like that. Sort of fast forward, we actually saw that there was like a demand for the product, and we ended up being able to like so we had this baked goods company for it was 2000 and I want to say 2007 to 2006 to 2010 maybe. So it was a period of 4 years or so. Wow. And by the time we had like, and so it sort of the challenge though was like we were trying to ramp up this business as the economic recession was also ramping up. And it was really challenging, like 2008, 2010. But by the time we were at like the final point of our business, we were in 26 Whole Foods locations in the Mid-Atlantic region of the US. And that was like
that's a big deal.
Retailer. And we had also been featured on the Today Show, the product, not us, the product, but they had there's a specialty food show. So those are sort of like 2 milestones that like I was really excited about in the business. But in order to grow the business, we would have had to invest more capital. And that would have either required us to like really put in more financial capital personally, or to find, it was really challenging to find like VC funding for food-based businesses back then. And like crowdfunding I think Kickstarter was the only crowdfunding platform that had just started, and there weren't many food products on there, if at all. And so we just made the personal decision that, we had a really good run, but like my parents were just not, I didn't, as a person in my 20s, I didn't have a lot of personal capital to like attribute to the business. It would have mostly come from my parents, and they were sort of at a stage where they were also like looking ahead to retirement. And I just really couldn't, from a personal perspective, like I would have felt really badly if they had put in all of their retirement or a significant chunk and weren't able to get that back. So we sort of said, you know what, we had a really good run. Like, let's end on a high note. And we sunset the company in a just kind of a natural way. But it was, I mean, the experience that I got from that, like, was really valuable. And then I ended up going back to grad school. I decided to go back for something tech related because I knew that was another passion of mine. Many interests is a pattern of my personality, just like
it's okay though. Yeah.
And that's like, I mean, I do think that is something that has served me really well in developing my career. And so I went back to grad school at Syracuse University and got a master's in information management. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to do some research with a professor who was looking at the impact of privacy and trust, the impact of technologies, specific technologies on privacy and trust. And I got really interested in that and thought, you know what, maybe I should pursue a PhD. I'm getting really, interested in academic research. I would love to kind of explore this broader topic of like the social impact of technology because it permeates our day-to-day life.
Right.
Right. And it's so relevant to how we live, how we solve problems, how we interact with people. And so I ended up deciding to apply to PhD programs and decided to go to Cornell's information science program. So yes. I got accepted there. And while I was there, I ended up working with my advisor, was really interested, and I got interested in 3D printing technology because at the time, this really interesting thing was happening where the patents for 3D printing technology had been held for just a few really industrial companies. And so those patents, though, expired around like this was around 2010, 2011, 2012, that the patents started to expire like gradually. And what that meant was that once the patents expire, anyone can take the patents and develop low-cost versions of the technology. And so that's when you started to see like that there were printers that were on the market for, at the time, they were still quite expensive, like $500, maybe $1,000. But like now today, because of the patents expiring and like there being a movement around, open source 3D printing technology, you can get a fairly good 3D printer for $200. And so I found that to be fascinating and was doing research in that space and looking at, and that's what led me to learning about maker spaces, because at the time there was a community-based maker space that opened up in Ithaca where I was going to college. It was in the basement. It's called the Ithaca Generator. It still exists. They've expanded, but it was in the basement of the old Ithaca printing press. So it was like where they used to print the newspaper, the city newspaper, but they don't, that newspaper doesn't really exist in the way that it did. And so a small group of makers decided to rent this space and put some shared equipment in there. And it included some 3D printing technology. And so initially I was like really interested in better understanding like how other people were using the technology. So I went to the space, and then I realized very quickly, I was like, 3D printing technology is really fascinating, but also what's very fascinating in this space is how people are interacting with each other. They were people that I would have never met because they weren't affiliated with the university. It was, people who live in Ithaca. Maybe they have some connection to the university, but I never would have met them because I would have been spending all this time on campus, and people were exchanging, were like sharing their, teaching other people skills. There was other equipment in there that you could use, like electronics and, some welding equipment, woodworking equipment. And I just got really enamored with, not just enamored, but I think I found it really compelling just to see people coming together, to make things with their hands and making them and just really being passionate about it, whether that was something very personal, maybe somebody was in the space working on trying to make a handmade musical instrument,
Right.
or they were really, and this is true that like there was a project in the space where someone was trying to lower the cost of like environmental sensors. So like, could you drop the cost of like an air quality sensor so that everyone would be able to afford an air quality sensor that where you can monitor the health of the air around you. So that part of it to me was very compelling, and I ended up applying. So the program at Cornell that I attended, they're very supportive of internships, and they actually really, if you're interested in getting some real world experience before you graduate, whether that's in the industry or with a nonprofit or something else, like they are really supportive of that. So I ended up applying. I had heard that the White House, this is at the time of the Obama administration, but I heard the White House had an internship program, and more specifically, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy had an internship program. So this is the office that coordinates with federal agencies. So they coordinate within the White House uh, across different priority areas related to science and technology, whether that has to do with energy and the environment or technology and innovation. And I just cold applied online for this internship. It was unpaid in DC, but I had a cousin there. And so I was like, oh,
You made it work.
I sleep on your floor? And then they're like, sure, come and sleep on our we have a mattress in our guest room. You can sleep on the mattress. And then I ended up getting a call back a few weeks later, and my application had been all about the maker movement and how technologies like 3D printing were really creating more opportunities for like communities to solve problems that were important to them and things like that. And I kind of made the pitch of like, I'd love to come and work on a team in the office, and like I could like help by connecting around sort of sharing more about the maker movement. And I had no idea, but there was already a team there that had been really connected to the maker movement, really understanding how it actually connected to President Obama's priorities around STEM education and entrepreneurship. And so they offered me an internship role. And then the first day that I got to OSTP, which is the Office of Science and Technology Policy, they said, oh, your project for the time that you're with us is to help us plan the White House Maker Faire, which President Obama is going to host. And I thought, well,
Oh my goodness.
I would love to work on that project. And there obviously was a whole team that I worked with around this, and I was the intern. But I think what they really were excited about was that I was already connected to the maker community. I already sort of understood the value of broadening access to these technologies and creating these inclusive spaces where people with different backgrounds could come together and work together to solve problems. And so that ended up leading to a 2-year position. So the internship, towards the end of my internship experience, the White House Maker Faire. I'll speed this up a little because I'm like, I know we've got other things to talk about, but like at the end of the so we use the Maker Faire to really like to really mobilize federal agencies and other organizations and institutions around the country to think about the ways that they could support the maker movement, which I mean, they talk about like leveraging the calendar for convening and getting work done. Like it was an amazing experience to learn about how to use events and work backwards to like foster new partnerships and collaborations. So then when we had the White House Maker Faire, we also announced a whole set of different commitments from federal agencies, and then also from foundations and colleges and schools and museums and libraries across the country that all were sort of raising their hands and saying, this is what we're going to do to support the maker movement and maker education in our communities. And I ended up transitioning into a role as the senior advisor for making
Mhm.
during the Obama administration, and stayed for 2 years. So I took a leave of absence from my PhD, and it was really incredible. Like I would have never imagined that would have been an opportunity for me. But along the way, to your point, I was supported by some really incredible individuals, had the opportunity to work with some incredible individuals, including some really amazing women along the way, both inside the White House and the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy, and also, with other organizations and institutions that we collaborated with. But that really, it did after. So one thing that I noticed, and this was eventually, I held a number of other positions after I left, after I rotated out of the Office
Right.
of Science and Tech Policy. But one thing that was very persistent, that kept coming up in the work that I was doing, was that communities that were really leading the charge around wanting to support maker-centered learning and access to inclusive makerspaces, they kept saying, the two sort of challenges that we face consistently is, one and two interchanged, is, funding and capacity. Like, we just have, funding, we can always use more funding, and we just need more talent. We need people from within our community who will, who are able to help us develop and implement more programming, or help us to grow and scale our makerspace. And that was something that, I really sort of thought, when the timing is right, I'd love to be able to focus on that particular problem of talent and capacity, and how to support that, and at a local level with
Right.
communities around the country. And that's how MakerUSA was really born. And that was something that Colin and I, my co-founder Colin and I, had talked about quite a bit before we decided to launch MakerUSA.
That's such an amazing story. And I think it speaks to, again, with Say More, our listeners are at varying stages of their career, but really looking at how you can take advantage of opportunities. In your case, thinking about an unpaid internship that then turns into a paid job, and a role that, is really shaped and tied into what you really wanted to do and what you were really passionate about. So thank you for sharing that. And I guess as we think more about this conversation and you reflect on your previous roles, what do you think, what's the one or two skills that stand out that you believe are just totally instrumental in shaping, your effectiveness in your current role?
Yeah, that's such a great question. One, I think, has really been about um being able to work with and collaborate and develop relationships
Right.
with people of very different backgrounds than my own.
Uh-huh.
And when I say backgrounds, I mean, differences in backgrounds, whether that's differences in education, it could be race and culture, but it also is. And I think this is very much the case. It's also differences in, like, personal value sets,
Yeah.
or political. I mean, because I have had experience
Yeah.
working in the political space, right? Like, in an administration. It's also differences in politics, or your viewpoints on certain issues. But putting that aside, or acknowledging it, but then
Yeah.
putting that aside, and then recognizing where you have common ground, has and a shared goal, and then really figuring out ways to work together around that shared goal, I think, is so important. And I think that just comes with, like, practice, and also putting yourself in situations where you might not feel comfortable initially, but at the end of the day, people are people, right? And
Yeah.
so you're able to, like, find, something that you have in common
Uh-huh.
that makes the differences that might create challenges in working with somebody, just a little bit less relevant. Like, so that's something that I feel like, has really been important to the work that I've done across the board.
Uh-huh.
And then the other one, I think, has been, the other skill set is just trying to be flexible and nimble and
Right.
responsive to situations. I think I like to be, I will admit that I am a planner. Like I like to plan. And then, but in
And
real
you're in
world,
a space where there's constant change.
yeah, and some things are just out of your control, right? And so like it's definitely a skill that I feel like I'm still honing, but being able to respond gracefully and in a calm manner, I think is great for your own like personal and mental and
Right.
emotional, but like also for the people around you. If something doesn't go well, or there is a last minute change or adjustment, or then I think that is a really transferable skill to any sort
Yes.
of business or work situation.
Well, you pointed out two critical skills, certainly. I mean, when I think about that, just really being okay and comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then just the whole, nimbleness and being, responsive to what's going on around you. So, I think about it, operating a national nonprofit that's, multiple locations. So as a co-founder, what are some of those pivotal responsibilities and challenges that you navigate on a daily basis with Maker USA and your leadership there?
Yeah, I mean, we're a small nonprofit. So right now we're a team of 5. That includes my co-founder. And I think, there's something about leading a small nonprofit that is it's really exciting because the variety of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis is pretty diverse, right? So
Yeah.
I could be in a meeting with potential partner or funder at the national level, and then I could be meeting with one of our amazing program managers to help brainstorm with them around programming that they want to design for their makerspace that they're working on. And so that sort of I would say like the nature of the work revolves a lot of like higher level discussions and like some strategic planning,
Mhm.
um, for the organization, as well as still being really connected to the work that is happening in the communities that we're serving. I'm based in Northern California, so I'm not in Atlanta or Knoxville on a day-to-day basis, but I do feel like I still have a connection to the work and an ability to like share, what I can in terms
Right.
of like my knowledge, because we have the model with where we do have program managers who are local to that specific community, and that's really very personally rewarding to me. And I really like that variety of work that I'm able to do on a daily basis.
So when you think about that, because again, there's so, as you mentioned, so many different aspects when you're leading a small organization that happens to have a national footprint. Because we're talking to our sisters on Say More, what kind of efforts have you prioritized, or maybe it's just kind of landed that way for creating opportunities for women within your organization? I mean, what's the composition?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. I can tell you we are a majority women organization. So of a team of 5, we are 4 of us are women.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think in general, I have um, within my role at Maker USA and in the roles that I've been in previously, because my experience in the fields that I've worked in have been in STEM and innovation, and then entrepreneurship and education. I have, you know, I have really tried to create opportunities to support and
Mhm.
uplift fellow women in the field, especially because working in STEM education, that is there is a big gap there, right? And so, and I also want to recognize that I have been the beneficiary
Right.
of a number of initiatives, and so I also feel a number of initiatives to uplift women and other underrepresented individuals in these fields. And so I feel like it is also like naturally my duty to like to pay it forward
To pay it
and
forward.
do what I can in some way. And so, for me, a lot of it is around, one, peer mentorship. So,
Uh-huh.
when I do meet a young woman who is maybe more junior in their career, really making sure that I am taking the time to be as supportive as I can.
Right.
If it's something that they want or need, within within Maker USA, I think. So all of our program managers at the moment are women, and for me, creating those opportunities really is around uplifting the work that they're leading at the national level, because they are members of the communities that they're doing their work in. But what I also really want to do is, and so they are maybe more visible in within their communities. But what we also seek to do with within Maker USA is to uplift the work that they're doing nationally, whether that means inviting them to speak about the work that they're leading at national level conferences,
Mm-hmm.
or doing that storytelling. We're actually right now focused on, and this, but because we talked about it in a different context, but working on our communications plan for Maker USA, so that there are more outlets and opportunities for those program managers to be able to tell their stories through our social media platforms and things like that.
I love that. And I know that, much of what we've talked about is that we see, again, not a linear piece of how you got there, that it was a variety of different things that played into it. There was support along the way. But is there any obstacle that you can think of where your resolve was just absolutely tested along the way, and how you then leverage that experience to like support and empower not only yourself, but even with the other women that you have interfaced with along the way?
So this isn't specific to my work with Maker USA, but I mentioned earlier that when I got the role at the White House Office of Science and Tech
Mm-hmm.
Policy, I took time off of my PhD program. And often what happens when you take time, about this probably, when you take time off of your PhD program, you just like never come back. And I was very much, I mean, by the time I sort of like revisited my PhD program, and to be fair, like my PhD advisor, my committee was very supportive.
All
They
right.
like recognized like the opportunity was great, but like as I got further and further away from like my I wasn't as connected to my program and my cohort anymore, and I just kind of felt like I was like, I don't think I can do this. Like I don't think I can. I basically had finished coursework, and I had done most of the research for my dissertation, but had to write it, and I just like it felt so like such a
Right.
monstrosity to me, like at that point. And I just was like, I can't. I think I'm just gonna. I don't. You know what? I'll just take the master's, because I could still
Yeah.
get the master's degree, and I was like, that'll be good. Like I'll just go with the master's, and then I have to say, like the other thing that, like in my experience, I've been very fortunate to have the experience of having mentors or advisors or bosses, people I've worked
Yeah.
for men who have been advocates for women. And so like my committee were, because I mean there were female faculty members in my department, but like my committee consisted of three men, all
Right.
of whom were incredibly supportive of like my career. At that point I had so then I ended up eventually they were like, no, you should keep going, like you're doing great,
Yeah.
like you can do it. And they're like, you could even work and do your dissertation, like do whatever, don't give up. And so they're very supportive. And it got to the point where like I had written the dissertation, and all that I needed to do was to like defend.
Uh-huh.
Um, but then by then I was pregnant. Like I got married and was pregnant, and then I was like, oh. Like I was like, but nothing like having a baby to like create a deadline for your dissertation defense.
Exactly. There's a spark. Yeah.
Yeah. So like my advisors were just like, you can do it. Just do it. You want to do it before the baby comes. Cause like they also had kids, they're older. And so they had kids and they were like, you don't want to do this. You don't want to try to the dissertation defense, like to do that after a baby. Like that's not going to be a great idea. Like they were saying that out of experience of having had kids, even though they, obviously men, but like, but they were very supportive. And so I ended up defending, and I was like 7 months pregnant and did it. And they were like, this is the first time we've ever had a student defend so close to the due date. They were like, you made us it's like a milestone. But, I think that that's something really important to like figure out too for, as you're charting your course of like, it's really important for women to support women, but to also find those men that are like allies, that are really supportive and wanting to like uplift women. And, I understand that like, that's not always the case. And sometimes it's hard to find those individuals. But when you do find them, I think it's really important to, maintain that relationship.
Right.
And they can really help you, especially in times you find challenging.
You've actually hit on a really great point, because oftentimes, and this is again about women, but I would share with my own personal experience too. Some of my greatest champions and supporters / allies have been men that have really invested a whole lot by sharing of experiences as well as just direction on how to chart that course for your career. So you are right. You can find them and all different genders. And we do want to make sure that, we're supportive and that it's not, we're ultimately all trying to help each other. So thank you for pointing that out. And I guess just, as we think about how we give back and the guidance that we receive along the way, what guidance would you offer an aspiring a woman who's like listening right now, who may be considering and said, you know what? I thought it was linear, but man, I kind of like how she did the breadcrumbs and ultimately landed in a place where she's passionate about. So what guidance would you offer to someone who's aspiring to follow the career path that's similar to yours?
Yeah, I would say that, um, being open to where an opportunity may lead you, and not assuming where an opportunity may lead you is really important. I think, I would say for myself, I am often quick to like, look at an opportunity and like, either say, make a very quick judgment about it and not give it as much thought. So, and oftentimes when you make a quick judgment, you don't think it through or talk to anyone, and it ends up being not a great decision. So,
Right.
I think, really thinking about, and to your point, like also, recognizing that like an opportunity may serve as a stepping stone to where you
Yes.
want to go, right? Like you may already have your North Star of where you want to be career wise, but it might be pretty complicated and maybe impossible to go from where you are at point A to like
Yeah.
where you want to be, which is like point D. And so like recognizing that like perhaps, charting a course where you are strategically like taking on roles that are going to serve you
Yes.
as stepping stones, I think is really important. And I know that like if you have a hunger to be somewhere career wise, that can be hard to do.
Right.
Um, but I think that is something else that is important to kind of keep in mind.
I think that's so powerful that you point that out, because again, it's, we all, I think we get used to microwave, we get used to TikTok, we get used to tweets, everything's so short and succinct, and it makes it seem like it's overnight. And really it's not overnight. It's a continuous pushing forward and building on and adding to. For those that it happens overnight, I mean, that's almost an anomaly, but really it's about how do you continue pushing forward to what your goal is. So that's really great that you said that. And I think part of that leads us into our next point of conversation is about how do you actively cultivate and refine your skills and expertise, basically that continuous learning. How does that work for you? How have you continued that growth?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I feel like a big part of that is around putting myself in environments and situations where I am exposed to new research, new ideas, new skill sets, and
Yep.
sort of in this post-COVID era, like pre-COVID, I had been doing a lot more travel,
Yeah.
and I feel like coming out of COVID, there was like it felt a little stale, and so sometimes, to be honest, like it felt challenging to kind of because I actually I really love to um, I really thrive in in-person environments, and so for me, being in a different environment and a different community, meaning with individuals and sharing about my work and getting perspective on getting their perspective on the work is really meaningful. So that's a big part of it. And I think also, I I I constantly like also remind myself that it's really important to develop relationships with the immediate team that you're working with in a really the one thing that I think we've done really well within Maker USA is to acknowledge that yes, these are your work colleagues, but it's really important to get to know people on a personal
Right.
level, because you're going to be able to learn more from them if you understand who they are as whole people,
So
not
true.
just not just Colin, co-founder, or Melissa, program manager. You're like, there is a lot more to a
Right.
person like than the work that they're leading, even though the work that they're leading in their professional in the professional context is important. It's about the whole person and what you can learn from the whole person. And so that to me has also been something that I strive to do too, is in terms of learning from everyone around me.
I think that's critical because as we think about, the culture matters even more so than ever before coming out of COVID. So many different ways to work now and how to maintain those relationships that it's not transactional, but really is relational, that you are caring about the whole person. So thank you for sharing and wrapping that in, that it's not just about learning about the roles and the work, but also about, what do you like gardening? Oh, you like, bowling? I mean, but really understanding what makes them who they are. So, and I think again for the listeners, it's important that we have that balance. It's not just about what's the next step on our trajectory. It really is about building that tribe, that space that you can count on, your support system, your allies. And when I'm thinking about this and what you mentioned with COVID, and how sometimes with adversity, even with those silver linings, what drives and sustains you? Because it's not always a perfect, things aren't always perfect. So what, drives and sustains your commitment to your role, particularly when you experience trying times? I think with nonprofits, funding and resources are always one of the things that's top of mind. So how do you keep yourself charged and positive?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, for me, I think it is this just commitment to like our mission of really supporting communities based off of the work that they're leading, and knowing
Mhm.
that you know they're I think there's a lot of intention around how we built our model around individuals. Like,
Yes.
I talk about maker spaces and maker centered learning, but at the end of the day, none of that exists if you don't have the people to lead the
Right.
work. You could have a makerspace and still call it a makerspace, but it would just be a room of technology and
Yeah.
equipment, and it'd be pretty soulless. There wouldn't be community there. There wouldn't be relationships built. There wouldn't be, you know, um, ideas and products being developed in this space
You're right.
unless the people to support those, activities and programs. And I think, I think for me, that's like what keeps me going, is knowing that, um, for me, it's a very personal thing, because I realize that the work we're doing is affecting individuals and their
Right.
families, and then more broadly communities. But I don't know, I feel really personally committed to that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I have like a really, not I guess I am really passionate about the maker movement, and I feel that anyone who wants to should have access to those types of experiences. And that's not the case now. And so there's
Yeah.
just more work to be done. And so even if it's a little bit tough sometimes, and you're not always sure if, you're going in the right direction, you get up the next day, and you figure out, you try again,
I love that, because you are, and listeners, you're hearing, this is her why. This is her why. And when you have and know your why, I mean, you can get up even in the toughest of times to go after that. And I think, again, with the work that Stephanie is mentioning, still, you can't eat the entire elephant as we hear it in one day, but really chipping away to ensure access is something that, again, speaks to the passion that she has, because she really is changing the landscape of our country. And it doesn't start with, sometimes, I say that you can be your best cheerleader for yourself, but oftentimes it's like you mentioned, with the support system, the sponsors, the allies. Is there one, or maybe it's not one, maybe it's multiple, but have the mentors and supporters that you've had along the way, have they shaped your leadership style and supported or encouraged that entrepreneurial mindset that you have right now?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, there are quite a few mentors that I've had along the way. I'll just share a couple. One, first and foremost, I would say my mom. She's been my longest mentor, as I think about sort of lessons that she has shared with me over the years around, having an entrepreneurial mindset, having a maker mindset, you know experimenting and being open to trying new ideas, and not
Yeah.
worrying if it's going to work out the first time, but then just iterating on those things. So I think she modeled that for me at a very young age, and throughout my life, even as an adult now. And so I mean, that's been really incredible to have that experience. And then yes, certainly, my my advisor, Dr.
Yeah.
Stephen Waker, for my PhD. Like, he is somebody that, his background is electrical engineering, but he had so many interests, and maybe this is why we connected. So many other
like souls, right?
he had a real, he has a very technical background, but he was very interested in the social impact of technology. And I think his very interdisciplinary approach to
Mhm.
studying things, whether that's technology or something else, that I feel like I've taken that on too, and that resonated really strongly with me. And then when I was at the White House, uh, you'll find this interesting, but like the head of the team that I was on, it was called the Tech and Innovation Team. So he's an advisor to President Obama, reports directly to uh, um, the president's science advisor. His name's Tom Khalil, and he would always call our team, we were policy entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
So he basically was like, you need to take an entrepreneurial approach to thinking about your role as a policymaker. And
Right.
I always thought that was like, I really appreciated that, because it was sort of this approach of like, you are an expert in your subject matter. Now you need to figure out, I mean, obviously not, there was support, but the idea was
Right.
more to think like, entrepreneurs are very proactive. They're very, they're forward thinking, and all of the, essentially layering on like the entrepreneurial mindset to the policy space, I found to be like really compelling and really helpful. And just, he is somebody who I continue to look up to, just in terms of the way that he had supported the team
Right.
that he oversees, in a way that kind of combines those entrepreneurial perspectives into the policy space. So those are certainly just a few of the many mentors that have, shaped and supported me over the years.
Sounds like a great group, and I love that it started with mom. I mean, it just is. I mean, sometimes you're looking at the person that really is going to, invest in you and feed you and pour into you, to make you into who you are. So thank you for sharing that. So when we think about the role of family, because again, mentioning mom and that shared experience that you all have, and now you have your own family, I think our listeners will be very interested, especially at the level of work that you're doing now. It's like balancing career demands. It can be taxing. How do you prioritize self-care, and how does that get promoted also within your organization with your team members? So how do you do it? And then how do you encourage that throughout your organization?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm really I'm really proud about, that Colin and I really, from the very beginning, we were very big on prioritizing what the culture of the MakerUSA team would be, and that
Mm-hmm.
work family balance was very important to us. I think in large part because we have young kids, and we wanted to create spaces for people who have children or are taking care of older parents
Right.
or have other commitments. You might not have kids, but you may have other commitments that are really important to you personally, and you shouldn't have to sacrifice those very important personal commitments for work. There should be a really good balance. And so one of the things that we've tried to do, and I think we've done pretty well, based off of feedback
Right.
from the program managers, is to model that, like to be transparent about that. Like if you're like, I have been in situations in other work environments where the exact opposite has occurred, where your boss has modeled like really poor work life balance, and then everyone else on the team feels like they need to follow that. Like,
Right.
it's like, it's the issue of like the boss staying till 10 p.m. and then you feel like you just have to stay till 10 p.m. and that's terrible. Like,
Right.
and so for us, a lot of it is around when we do have our weekly our check-in meetings, our team check-in meetings and things like that, sharing what's happening on the personal front, and
Yeah.
celebrating what's happening personally for us, like, so that folks know what's going on with people. And if things aren't going well, like being really cognizant of that. So my son is 4, he is constantly picking something up from daycare. Similarly, like Colin's got young kids. So if one of our kids is sick, we just, and he has to, if he has to stay home with me, I just say, I'm really sorry. Like, I need to rearrange my schedule. But I most likely am out of pocket today. We make that very clear. Like, sick days are for not just for taking care of people, but also sick days for you. Like if you need sick days,
Exactly.
you, there shouldn't be one pot of limited sick days for like for your whole family. Like that doesn't make sense, right? So, so we try to really do that. And then like self-care, I think for me, I think being the mom of a young child and working full time can be a little challenging, but like more recently have definitely tried, have succeeded in carving out some time for hobbies that like I have long enjoyed. So like I have been teaching myself the ukulele for the past few years, and
Wow.
continue to like learn new songs. And now I'm taking requests from my 4-year-old. So I can now play Yellow Submarine if anybody wants to request that.
I love it.
That's been, and I think that is really important. Even if it's like 10 minutes of me playing the ukulele, I
Right.
feel better about that because that was time that I spent learning, using a different part of my brain and like doing something that I like personally love and want to do. So that's not attached to like to work necessarily.
I love that. I love how you have built that into the workspace and culture as well. And I will share with the listeners, I am affiliated with the organization that Stephanie leads. And I will tell you, there is absolute excitement from team members as they're sharing and communicating what they're doing. And I think a lot of that comes from just culture and okay to be you and bring your entire self to the job. So kudos to you, Stephanie and Colin, for the work that you're doing. And this actually brings us to listeners. I know, and Stephanie will always have that virtual door open to her for coming back. But the one thing that we want to know now, lastly, what do you think will be, when you think about your legacy, what do you envision leaving through your contributions relative to the work that you're doing at MakerUSA that is not only speaking to who you are, but really is supportive and drives home that message about inclusivity and making sure that everyone has an opportunity? What will be that enduring legacy?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I mean, I think like within the organization, like I am optimistic and really will continue to strive for, a culture where um our team members, feel like they can be themselves every day. And when I say that they can be themselves, I also, I you know I think you spoke so kindly about team members being excited about the work. And we try really hard to like really uplift the work that program managers are leading in their communities. But like as you said, like there are just some days and times where like challenges happen or
Mm-hmm.
there's obstacles, and that can be really hard. I mean, and so creating an environment where people can be can be their whole selves and feel comfortable sharing with someone else, on the team if they are, or multiple people for that matter, if they're coming up against a roadblock or they're feeling really challenged or down.
Right.
I know like to your point, like you had shared sometimes like there are situations where women can feel like they're hesitant to ask a question because it's
Yes.
sort of like, is that demonstrative of like my lack of knowledge or confidence about an issue? And I never want that to be the case. Like within our organization, I want folks to be in a space where they feel comfortable um and vulnerable if they need to be
Yes.
vulnerable, and in order to be able to solve whatever issue they're facing, they should feel like they can feel vulnerable, and then that's okay, and like that we also model that as leaders of the organization too.
I love that because again, you all are co-founders. You all are the cornerstone. You are everything. You're the foundation of making this happen and bringing this to our nation. And to know that, part of your enduring legacy will be to create that culture where it can continue that everybody gets to be 100% themselves, which then permeates and goes into the communities that we're serving through Maker USA's mission. So how powerful. I want to thank our listeners for joining us for another episode of Say More, powered by Envision More Consulting Group, where we bring your bold visions to life. I want you to not only like, but certainly share, subscribe, all of that, making sure that you're tuning in and making sure that other women are being lifted up. And until the next episode, have a great one and be great.